So the thing about blonde ale is that it suffers from a bit of an identity crisis. There are tons of blonde ales out there, but many of them are not referred to as such. They're called golden ales or summer ales. They are similar to a Kolsch or a pale ale in so much as they are light and smooth and crisp. They are not at all similar to a Belgian blonde ale, save for their appearance. As a result, they are hard to spot in the wild. Going through the style parameters may help a bit, but then again, it may end up confusing you even more. With that in mind, let's get into it. According to the overall impressions section of the BJCP guidelines, a blonde ale is defined as easy drinking, approachable, malt-oriented American craft beer, often with interesting fruit, hop, or character malt notes, well-balanced and clean, is a refreshing pint without aggressive flavors. That's not the best interpretation I've seen in this guide, grammatically speaking. It's like even the BJCP couldn't hammer out a decent description on this one. That does not bode well for this episode. Anyway, the aroma on a blonde ale will present as light to moderate sweet malt, possibly with a note of light bread or even caramel. A low to moderate fruitiness is acceptable, but not necessary. There may be a low to medium hop aroma, commonly citrusy or fruity hop notes. The hop aroma can reflect almost any hop variety, but those are the ones you'll typically get: citrusy, floral, fruity, or spicy. The appearance of a blonde ale is light yellow to deep gold. They are clear to brilliant, with a low to medium white head with fair to good retention. Easy enough. Now, clear to brilliant, it sounds like splitting hairs, and it kind of is. As far as clarity goes, some beers, like this one, are very clear. Others, like a Weiss beer or a hazy IPA, are cloudy. It's one of the least important aspects of a beer's profile overall, but if your beer's supposed to be very clear and it comes out looking like a swamp, that could present some issues. If you are given a cloudy beer, when you know it's supposed to be crystal clear, you would assume that the beer is of lesser quality. And blonde ales are generally used as an introductory craft beer, meaning it's an easy drinker used to get people into the idea of drinking craft instead of macro. So the clarity of a blonde ale is more important in that regard because people who drink macro beers are used to clear beer. Haze is just going to scare them away before they even get to try a more fun, flavorful craft beer. There are two main factors in the brewing process that contribute to a lack of clarity in beer. They're called cold break and hot break. These terms always give me trouble because they sound like actions, like things you do in the brewing process, like you take a hot break or a cold break, but that's not what they are at all. A cold break is when a compound of proteins and carbohydrates precipitate from the wort when it's cooled. This glob of proteins can contribute to chill haze if it's left in the solution. Hot break is a similar thing, an amalgam of proteins and polyphenols that coagulates during the wort boil. This will eventually clump up enough to fall out of the solution and sink to the bottom of the brew kettle. The hot break will cause haze, but some of those polyphenols can also add tannins to the beer, which can make it unpleasantly astringent. You don't want astringency in your blonde ale. This is a delicate beer style. There should be some initial soft malty sweetness, maybe some other light maltiness that can come off as bready or toasty or biscuity. You might get some low caramel note, but that isn't a common flavor in a blonde ale. And if you're lucky, you'll get some low to medium fruity esters, but these aren't required. You may detect a light to moderate hop flavor, but this won't be overly aggressive. Same with the hop bitterness. It will be medium low to medium. These beers typically balance toward the malty side, if not right in the middle. The finish will be medium dry to slightly malty sweet. This impression of sweetness comes more from a lack of bitterness than from any actual residual sweetness. That's maybe a confusing idea, but sometimes a beer will seem sweet, even when there's not much sugar in it. That happens with beers that are very lightly hopped, but it can also happen when a beer uses lactose. This milk sugar is generally added as a powder late in the brewing process, and it simply dissolves into the beer. It's not consumed by brewer's yeast, so that sweetness remains, and it pops out more because there's no hop bitterness to balance it all out. Anyway, The mouthfeel of a blonde ale will give you a body that is medium light to medium. Carbonation is medium to high. These beers are smooth without being heavy. They're very drinkable beers. A lot of breweries, as I said, will offer a blonde ale or golden ale or a summer ale, same difference. They do this as an alternative to your standard American lagers. Blonde ales make great entry-level craft beers. They are smooth, easy drinking, lighter beers that won't scare off a new drinker. You don't want to start someone off with a pastry stout or a milkshake IPA or whatever. That's too much of a flavor explosion for their fresh little taste buds to handle. And that brings us up to the history section of the guideline. Honestly, what is written in the guide is about as much information as I could find otherwise about this style, which is to say, not much of anything. Some say the blonde ale developed as a lighter version of a pale ale. Okay, cool. But that's literally all I could find about its origins. The guideline simply says, an American craft beer style produced by many microbreweries and brewpubs, particularly those who cannot produce lagers. Regional variants exist. Many U.S. West Coast brewpub examples are more assertive, like pale ales, but in most areas this beer is designed as the least challenging beer in their lineup. That's it. Not much of a history lesson, is it? But hey, if that's all there is to say about it, then that's all there is to say. I'm not going to argue. We'll just move right along to characteristic ingredients. Blonde ale is generally an all malt beer, but sometimes brewers will add up to 25% wheat malt and or some sugar adjuncts. It doesn't discriminate as far as hop varieties are concerned. All hops are welcome. The typical yeast used is a clean American one, or a lightly fruity English one, or a straight up Kolsch yeast. Blonde ale can also be made with a lager yeast or simply cold conditioned like a lager. They may be made with honey, spices, fruit, etc., but those flavors should be in the background. Any kind of bold flavors are not welcome in a blonde ale. These are simple beers. They typically have a bit more flavor than an American lager or a cream ale. They're definitely less bitter than an American pale ale. They are easy to mistake for a Kolsch, in my opinion. There's a lot of overlap in a Kolsch style beer and a blonde ale. The IBU range here is 15 to 28. SRM goes from 3 to 6. That's from straw to gold in color. And the ABV ranges from 3.8 to 5.5%. Again, all that is very mundane, very ordinary. Not that there aren't some good examples of the style out there. There are tons. Like I said, many a craft brewery has some version of a blonde ale on tap. They may not call it that, but that's what it is. If you see a golden ale or summer ale, that's most likely a blonde ale in disguise. The Big Wave Golden Ale from Kona comes to mind, or the Twilight Summer Ale from Deschutes. Sierra Nevada's BFD is a more hopped up example of this style. BFD means beer for drinking, of course. Four Hands has a really nice hoppy blonde called Sin Help, but I don't think that one's going to be in their rotation for much longer. I think I'm the only person who likes that beer, and I don't drink enough of it for them to keep it around. What else? I guess Hill Farmstead Walden is one of the more sought after versions of the style. That or any of the Treehouse beers that Beer Advocate lists as blonde ales. My point is, there are lots of blonde ales out there. Go drink one or two, or three or four. I'm going to take a break. I think we sufficiently covered this fairly pedestrian beer style. Not that there's anything wrong with a simple beer style. I know I sound like I'm not into blonde ales, but in a right time, right place situation, I'll be all about them. We'll see how Thomas feels about a good old blonde ale. Stick around, we'll be right back.